Welcome. You have made it back. We are about to open up the book of Exodus. Last video, I kind of set it up a little introduction to kind of see where we're going with it. And uh, it is a really important book. One of the things that I won't go down that road, but you need to know Exodus. Exodus will make a lot of things that have not made sense to you really, really easy to understand. Because some of the things that we don't cover in church, or especially in sermons, because we just don't have time, is some of that background information that you need to study yourself to find. Because without it, some things don't make any sense. Joseph being put in charge of Egypt, that doesn't make any sense if you don't realize that there's Semites in charge of Egypt at the time. They're not Egyptians. Then it makes sense. So now we're in Exodus chapter 1. So let's jump right in. I'm going to read from the New Living Translation because there's not a whole lot of difference in the wording, maybe a little, and I'll hopefully point that out. But let's jump right in. These are the names of the sons of Israel, that is Jacob, who moved to Egypt with their father, each with his family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. In all, Jacob had 70 descendants in Egypt, including Joseph, who was already there. In time, Joseph and all his brothers died, ending that entire generation. But their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely powerful and filled the land. Eventually, a new king came to power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. A non-Semite king, an actual Egyptian king. He said to his people, "Look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape from the country." So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. They appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramses as supply centers for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks to do all the work in the fields. They were ruthless in all their demands. I don't know what that was, but hopefully you didn't hear it. I think it was my watch. But then Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. "Then, when you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live." But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives. "Why have you done this?" he demanded. Why have you allowed the boys to live?" "The Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women," the midwives replied. "They are more vigorous and have their babies so quickly that we cannot get there in time." So God was good to the midwives, and the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: "Throw every newborn Hebrew boy in the Nile River, but you may let the girls live." It's a pretty crazy story, but it's going to get even better. So about 350 years have passed. 70 is kind of the symbolic number of all kind of totality, everybody. The actual number was probably around 200, and I'll show you why that's important later. But most Israelites still lived in the same place in Goshen where Joseph had put them. The city they lived in was called Avaris, and even though you can't look that far, I can, and it is actually still on the map. So in verse 6, Joseph died and all that generation. So the second and third, now remember, this is the generation that came to Egypt first. The second and third generation of Israelites was different from those who came from Canaan. Those who came to survive the famine thought they were staying for a short period of time. They were just visiting, basically. But the next generation, especially that second, third, and fourth, I guess the third and fourth, they had no idea. They were home. They were born there. So they called it home. They didn't really see Egypt as anything else. So verse 7 says that the Israelites continued to prosper. This fruitfulness will lead to confrontation, obviously, because that's part of the problem. The Hyksos rulers favored the Israelites because they were family, but it was also creating jealousy and hatred by the Egyptians. So the end of verse 7 is the end of Israel's golden era in Egypt. Things go downhill quickly from there. Throughout the Old Testament, it's assumed that we understand the Hebrew societal structure too. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Now, the nation of Israel was founded by and named after Jacob, and then God changed his name to Israel. He had 12 sons who formed the first subdivision of Israel. Because remember, the God is electing and separating people constantly. That's what he's doing. And so each of these sons would establish their own tribe and their branch, basically, of Israel. So in Western thought, Jacob's the father, the 12 sons, the children, their children, the grandchildren, and their children, the great-grandchildren. It's a little different when you talk Hebrew societal structure. So let's do that real quick. Israel was the nation. The 12 sons were the tribes that formed the nation. And then the sons of the 12 tribal leaders each formed their own clan or family. So the offspring of these clans then formed separate households. It's a little strange, but trust me, stick with me and all of this will make sense. So the structure is nation, which is all of Israel, tribe, the 12, clan, household, and then family. Now remember, household, more people lived in the household than your immediate family. Generations lived together. The leader of a tribe is called a prince. The leader of each clan is called a chief. And the leader of a household is the head. So these princes were the rulers. They inherited their position. You know, an outsider couldn't become, he could become a member of the tribe, but he couldn't become the prince. That one was a family line. You had to inherit it. You had to be able to trace your lineage back to Jacob too. So representatives of the common people were called elders and officers. This leader operated under the authority of the tribal leaders. Elders and officers could be removed, but the princes couldn't, except by, well, it's complicated. Don't even worry about that part. But this new king was Egyptian. He was the first Egyptian ruler in a while, too. And he decided right off the bat, I'm going to play the race card against the Israelites. So now that the Hyksos rulers, I don't know why I can't say that, were defeated, those who supported those rulers and looked like those rulers became the enemies. You know, pretty basic. We do the same thing today. The Israelites were about 25% of the population, and so he fears them, but he needs them too because they provide a really, really big part of the economy. But he wanted to be able to control them, so slavery was the answer. Basically, everybody hates them, so let's just enslave them. It was fairly easy to accomplish. And remember too, when the leader of something tells you to hate something, that's when you need to question it. And we do that all the time. Churches love to do it. When somebody leaves a church, well, hey, nobody talk to him. If I catch you talking to him, you're out too. Nobody kills their own like Christians, right? So the construction projects brought the country back because of their slavery, because they were able to build all these waterways and storage buildings, really brought the Egyptian economy back. But another aspect failed because they were being oppressed. They just created more children. They just, you know, I'm pretty sure those of us that are adults know how that works. So here we see a God pattern, though. The more you persecute God's people, the more they become fruitful. They grow. So a lot of times we all want, hey, I want it easy. I don't want to be persecuted. But honestly, if I hadn't been persecuted, I would have never started this podcast. I had all the time in the world to do it. I just didn't want to, or I didn't put the time into it until, you know, whatever. So as long as the church continues to look more and more like the world, it's not going to grow. It's not going to be fruitful because it's not being persecuted. It fits in with the world. The world likes the church. Some of the things going on in the church just drive me batty, but So Pharaoh orders all the midwives to kill the sons, and this is really our first instance of civil disobedience. To honor God and defy the government is good. That's what God tells us to do. Uh, yes, He tells us to respect our leadership and those kind of things, but when they ask you to do something against the Word of God, I would use abortion as a great example. You should disobey. So, being a midwife too was important. In the case of twins, the midwife would say which one, they would usually testify in court as to which one was first because they got the firstborn blessing. So that was a really big deal. Um, Probably Shiphrah and Puah were the head of the guild. They were like the people in charge of like all the midwives. So that's probably why he summoned those two in particular. Plus, some midwives, a lot of midwives, didn't have families of their own. So when God says that because of their obedience, He blessed them with families, that was a really big deal. So Pharaoh tells the people when they see a Hebrew woman give birth to throw that kid into the river. But really what he said was, it's your responsibility to let us know so we can send somebody to do it. He really didn't ask everybody to do it. He just meant, if you see somebody like that, let me know and we'll send somebody over there to take care of it. The attitude towards the Jewish people will become a pattern throughout history, obviously. If you turn on the news today or anything like that, the hatred for the Israeli people is still very strong. And then in verse 13 and 14, the original Hebrew root word is abad. These verses in their most literal sense would read this way. So they, Egypt, made the children of Israel subservient with crushing labor. They embittered their lives with hard servitude in brick and mortar and with all kinds of servitude in the field. All their service in which they made them subservient with crushing labor. I know it doesn't make a whole lot of sense hearing it, but the important part about this spiritual principle that we're trying to make here, God's trying to make here, is whom you serve determines the nature of that service. So when you're put under this crushing service, slavery, forced, your service is going to be determined by why you're doing it. And if you're doing it out of obligation, it won't be good. So God's showing when we are forced to serve Him, which He doesn't do, then generally our service is not in the right heart issue. It's not with the right intention. So He doesn't want us to feel like we're being forced into serving Him. We're willingly, openly, and encouraging each person to serve God with a full heart. So that's Exodus chapter 1, and now you're in the second book of the Bible. So next time we'll cover chapter 2. God bless. If you're enjoying this, read ahead, get ahead of us so you can kind of get some knowledge, get some questions going. Hit me some questions or comments. I had talked early on about doing the book of Jonah in May. I didn't get there because of a number of reasons. And so the study is ready. I'm going to get to work on it hopefully in the next week or so and get that out. We may even do like a Facebook page or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But God bless. Thanks for joining us. Love God, love people, and change the world.